Hello, I'm Simon Whistler, you're watching TopTenzNet, and in the video today, 10 dark and depressing facts about slavery. But if you're looking for something less dark and depressing, do check out my new channel, Biographics. We do biographies of notable people from history and the present day, all sorts of stuff over there, longer form content. Please go check it out, and if you like it, do subscribe. There is a link in the description below. And let's get into it. Slavery is one of the most evil institutions in the world and a horrifying habit that humans over the ages have continued to regress to. We have evidence of slavery as far back as recorded history goes, and it is quite likely it existed even before then. Some people like to think that in our modern age, slavery is being stamped out. While it is technically illegal in all countries today, it actually exists in some form or another in most countries of the world, just under a different name. The truth is that there are more slaves today than there ever have been in recorded history, and it may be harder to stamp it out now than it ever has been in the past. The problem is that much of it has gone dark, deeply under the table, or involves legal loopholes where people are not technically called slaves, but might as well be for practical purposes. The world of slavery, it's a dark place, and fears the light that is shed upon it. Number 10. One of the most common ways children are sold into slavery is by their own parents. In many parts of the world, children being sold into slavery by their own parents is incredibly and horrifically common. Some of the worst countries for this are countries like India and Cambodia, where there are many people living in poverty and desperation, who traffickers and those looking for slaves of their own are all too happy to take advantage of. Most of these parents cite financial desperation for why they sell their children or sell their children's sexual services. They will act as if it hurt them to do it and state that they had debts and no other way, but it still seems like a horrible thing to do to your own child. It's a sad state that the world is in, that there are so many people living in such desperate poverty that they would sell their own flesh and blood for money. Number 9. When LGBT youth are kicked out by their parents in the USA, they often end up as sex slaves. Some parents in the United States are so convinced that being gay is evil that they literally stop loving their son or daughter when they tell them that they are gay. Many young teens tell their parents that they are gay and they will get kicked out of the house for this announcement. Not only is this already a very sad and morally questionable thing to do to a child, but to make matters worse, they are consigning a child who loved them, their own flesh and blood, to a possibly horrible fate. Young LGBT kids are literally some of the most vulnerable in society. They are often already ostracized at school, their families have kicked them out, and they are struggling with their identity. Further, they might have no one to help them, and on top of all that, they're scared. This makes them prime targets for predators, and statistics have shown that many young LGBT orphans end up trafficked and used by others for sexual services, almost always involving some form of coercion along the way. The youths tend to go along with far too much because they have no more parental guidance and no one there to help them. When a predator comes along telling them that they can help, it is too easy for them to accept their guidance, and then they find themselves in a horrible situation that they can't get out of. Knowing this, anyone who truly loves their child could not imagine kicking them out, no matter how much issue they have with them coming out. Number 8. Even in the US, parents sell their children as slaves or sell their sexual services. Most people would like to think of the United States as a place where parents are a bit more enlightened and would not sell their own children into slavery. However, the sad truth is that even in the good old US of A, an alarming number of trafficked children have reported either being sold as slaves as young children or having their sexual services sold by their parents when they were very young. One girl recounts her being trained as a prostitute and forced into the lifestyle starting at 6 years old. Her mother manipulated her by saying that she would be a prostitute for mummy if she loved her. People have also been caught just straight up selling their children and sometimes seem to have little remorse for the action. Some people see a way to make a profit and sadly do not care about their own flesh and blood. The underworld of child slavery is alive and well in the US, and unfortunately it is aided and abetted far too often by the children's own parents. Number 7. In India, many children are born into a form of hereditary debt bondage. Amnesty International and other organizations that track global slavery put the number of enslaved people around the world at roughly 30 million, and recent statistics show that roughly half of modern-day slavery originates in India. And we don't mean India is taking people from other countries and holding them as slaves, we mean they are gladly keeping large amounts of their own people in slavery. Part of the problem is things like the caste system, which often puts people in forced forced social obligations where they are not truly free in terms of their actions. And another part of the problem is things like forced marriages, which are their own form of slavery. However, the vast majority of it comes from something called hereditary debt bondage. Especially in rural areas, farmers often have to take out loans from landowners or others in the area and cannot ever really pay back these debts. They end up working their entire lives for very little in order to try to pay back the loans and often die without ever having done so. In the United States and many countries, their debt would not carry on. In India, though, it is hereditary, and oftentimes villagers in many rural areas are born owing large amounts of money to local landowners and hence owing them labor until they can pay the debt off. Unfortunately, the way these debts are structured, it is unlikely they will ever be paid off, ensuring that generations to come will be born into slavery, working for free to enrich a nearby landowner. Number 6. Despite major company promises, chocolate is still harvested by brutally controlled child slaves. The Ivory Coast and Ghana produce almost all of the world's chocolate, and all of the chocolate harvesting work is done by child slaves. While the governments have technically made it illegal, this really is only on the surface, and child labor is still the rule of the day, with brutal beatings and harsh working conditions a regular way of life for the children of the area. The chocolate companies, in order to fight bad press, have claimed that they would stop child labor, but they keep pushing back their deadline for when they would bring it to an end, and it has now been about 15 years since their promise, and things, well, they're not getting any better. The chocolate companies will have you believe that the reason is because they cannot control the governments of those countries and simply cannot force them to make changes fast enough. But this really is a falsehood. The truth is that even just Nestle alone dwarfs the GDP of both of these chocolate-producing countries, and those countries rely on the big chocolate manufacturers for business. If they wanted to put real pressure on the child slavers, they absolutely could, but profit is more important to them than morals. Number 5. Much of online porn features enslaved women, often from Southeast Asia or Eastern Europe. Porn is considered a totally victimless vice by many people, and in a lot of situations, this is indeed the case. For example, if you know it was properly and legally made in the United States, you know no one is being trafficked or used as slave labor. However, much of the porn available online comes from very questionable sources all over the world, and it is hard to estimate just how much of it involves people who were coerced into what they are doing. Unfortunately, many of the countries like Russia, China, and regions like Southeast Asia and Eastern Europe produce a lot of porn and are also known for being some of the worst for trafficking on the entire planet. In the Philippines, they have had a recent problem where young girls are tricked into revealing small amounts about themselves online and then are blackmailed further until they are in too deep and forced to show more and more. In other words, they are being tricked into slavery online and being forced into pornography. After that, they are slowly graduated to being forced to perform physical acts and being entirely under the control of gangs of traffickers. And while most people tend to think of sex slaves as only being used as prostitutes, some trafficked victims, such as some in Japan, are also forced to work as nude dancers. Slavers do not limit the people they abuse to just one avenue of exploitation, but try to use them as fully as possible. The world of trafficking, it's a very evil and cruel place. Number 4. Some electronics manufacturers in China imprison their workers and treat them like real slaves. Foxconn is a company in China known for making lots of products for Apple and being one of the worst employers in the world. The international light was shed on them when it came out that people were being forced to work 12-plus-hour shifts and were not being allowed to leave. They were also being forced to live on campus, and suicide attempts and actual suicides were very common. The world called on Apple to force Foxconn to clean things up, but they really only made token efforts in order to save as much face as possible and get attention off their backs. Even after the entire thing was over, they still felt that the scrutiny was unfair and undeserved. The main complaint and issue was that they used mostly student interns, who were basically slaves. While they could technically leave at any time, they were basically forced against their will to work for Foxconn by their schools because they had a worker shortage. If they did not work, they were told they could not graduate. When suicides became a problem, instead of fixing the long abusive workdays, they installed nets to stop the jumpers so they wouldn't lose valuable slaves to the concrete below. As far as Foxconn is concerned, students are a resource for making phones, and education comes second. To imagine how crazy this really is, imagine if a university in the United States told you that you could not graduate if you didn't go to work as an intern at a local factory for free, learning absolutely nothing to do with your area of study. Number 3. Child trading is an under-the-table but far too common practice that helps trafficking thrive. One of the most bizarre and horrible things on our list is the people in the United States who have basically made a game out of exchanging children that they don't want anymore. These people are known for adopting children, usually from outside the United States, that often have behavioral problems and trying to raise them as their own. They quickly get frustrated because they realize they're not cut out for it, and instead of doing a reasonable thing like contacting a proper foster agency about the situation, they take part in something called private rehoming. This is where they go to an online bulletin board and advertise the kid as if they were an unwanted pet. These children are then given away with nothing more than a notarized statement saying who the child's new guardians are. There is no real way of vetting the new parents and no real paper trail for the authorities to follow. As you might imagine, many of these children end up disappearing, trafficked away to be a slave because some parent out there treated the kid as if he was a puppy that they could just trade away. While there are attempts to shut these people down, they will always find a way to communicate with each other and have helped create a vast network of underground slave children in the US. The sad thing is that while all of these people are criminally negligent, most of them seem truly not to understand the gravity of their actions or what an awful thing they are doing to the child. Number 2. Au pairs in the USA are usually treated as slaves and have little legal recourse. Au pairs are foreign workers who come to the country and live with a family for a time, helping them with domestic duties such as babysitting, cleaning and cooking. The idea is that an au pair will be given meals, a very small stipend to buy things occasionally, and of course will not have to worry about a rent because they have a place to live. Unfortunately, au pair programs are rife with abuse, and many au pairs are basically treated like chattel, slaves to be used as needed and threatened into submission if necessary. Many au pairs report being denied meals they are legally entitled to and told they will have to buy their own. Many have been screamed at and abused horribly, only to have very little recourse, as it is usually their word against their hosts. To make matters worse, complaining either to the host or to anyone else usually ends up with retaliation and threats to send them back to their home country right away. The sad thing is, au pairs are basically the new indentured servants and are treated with almost no respect at all. It is a program that needs a huge overhaul in order to prevent the rampant abuse that is currently plaguing it. Number 1. The Spartans were brutally cruel and horrible to their slaves, the Helots. The Spartans were known for being incredibly powerful warriors and for great bravery on the battlefield, but when it came to their slaves, the Helots, they were incredibly cowardly. The Helots were bound to the soil, serving on their master's land, unable to be sold or bartered. They worked for the Spartans and had no rights, but they also outnumbered the Spartans greatly. This left the Spartans constantly worried that the Helots would revolt and one day bring about their downfall, so they made plans to keep them constantly in check. They would regularly patrol around the borders of the Helots' land, looking for anyone who looked aggressive or troublesome, and would routinely humiliate and mistreat the Helots in order to keep them firmly in their place as slaves. However, their crowning blow to the Helots, to remind them regularly who was in charge and to keep their numbers down, was ritual slaughter. Once a year, a day would be declared to kill Helots without any legal consequences, and many Helots would be slaughtered by young warriors. The idea was to keep them terrified and keep their numbers thinned. Their fear was not entirely unwarranted, as the Helots did attempt more than once to change their situation, although they were never given their freedom. So I'm not going to ask if you found that video enjoyable, but I do hope you found it interesting. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button below, and don't forget to subscribe. Also, if you're looking for something else to watch, please do check out my new channel. It's called Biographics. You'll find a link to it in the description below. Also, some other top 10s videos over there on the right. And as always, thank you for watching.